Ch.27, Dallying HuaLian, Nightfall in Sinner's Pit 4. Chemo, what's going on? The Guoshi asked in the Banyu language as she landed. The moment she spoke, HuaLian thought her voice was very different than what he had imagined. Although still cold, her voice was tiny, like the grumblings of a sulky child, not a voice that was cool and powerful. If not for his good hearing, he might not have even heard her properly. What's going on? They're all dead! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Chemo shouted. How did they all die? The Guoshi asked. Isn't it because you pushed them all down and trapped them in this godforsaken hell? Exclamation mark! Who's here? There's another person, the Guoshi said. At the bottom of the pit there should be 2 other people, but San Lang had neither breath nor heartbeat, so the Guoshi didn't detect his presence. It was also complete chaos on top of the walls earlier, and no one kept track of who fell and who ran away, so she thought there was only HuaLian. It was them who killed all of my soldiers. Are you happy now? Everyone you wanted to kill is finally dead. The Guoshi was silent, and suddenly a tiny burst of light flared, illuminating a small, black-clad girl with a palm torch. The girl looked to be 15 or 16, both eyes blackened, not unbeautiful, but just unhappy. Her forehead and cheeks were full of bruises, clear and distinct under the light. The hand controlling the palm torch was shaking, causing the flames to flicker. If it hadn't been confirmed earlier, no one would think this pale little girl was the Guoshi of Banyu. The flames in her hand illuminated herself and her surroundings. The ground next to her feet was piled with the armored corpses of Banyu soldiers. HuaLian couldn't help but sneak a look beside himself. That palm torch in the Guoshi's hand was very small, and did not light up the entire pit, so they were still immersed in darkness. But using the wee light, HuaLian could still see faintly that the one next to him was dressed in red. It wasn't clear, and he wasn't sure, but he could still somewhat distinguish what was close to him. San Lang was already taller than him, but now, maybe, he seemed taller than before. HuaLian moved his eyes up, paused at the neck, then continued upward, stopping at an elegantly shaped chin. San Lang's upper features were still hidden in the shadows, but HuaLian thought the bottom half was distinctly different than before. Still handsome, but the lines were much more defined. Feeling he was being watched, San Lang tilted his head, and his lips curled upwards slightly. Perhaps he wanted too much to get a better look, to get closer, that without realizing it, HuaLian took a step closer to him. Just then, Chemo wailed in the distance, seeming to be in shock after seeing the bloody tragedy before him. HuaLian abruptly snapped out of it and turned to look, and saw Chemo was clutching his own head. But despite the general's cries, the Guoshi's expression remained wooden, and she only nodded. Good. In the midst of mourning, hearing those words made Chemo rage once more. Good. What's good? How do you mean? Exclamation mark. Good means we're finally freed, Guoshi said. She turned to HuaLian, who was still shrouded in the dark. Were you the one who killed them? This was an accident, HuaLian replied. You're lying through your teeth. Chemo exclaimed. HuaLian responded bold-facedly, life is full of accidents. Guoshi gave him a look, but her expression was unreadable. Who are you? Her words were spoken in perfect Han dialect. 29. And it wasn't said in an interrogative tone. I'm a heavenly official. This one here is my friend, HuaLian replied. Himo couldn't understand their words, but could still tell they weren't fighting, and demanded, what? Are you two saying? The Guoshi looked HuaLian over and eyed San Lang for a moment before quickly looking away. She said, we've never had heavenly officials visit before. I thought you had all already abandoned this place. HuaLian had thought they would have to fight the Guoshi of Banyu, but was surprised to find she was. This despondent, devoid of any will to fight. She spoke up again, do you two want to leave? Of course we do, but there's an array set in this pit, so we can't. HuaLian said. Hearing this, the Guoshi walked to one of the walls, raised her hand and drew something. She turned around and said, there. I released the array. You two can leave now. This was way too easy. HuaLian really didn't know what to say now. Just then, a voice called from above, hey. Is anyone down there? If not, I'm leaving. It was Fu Yao's voice. HuaLian heard San Lang Tsk next to him, and immediately looked up. There was a shadow of a man, looking down into the pit. HuaLian shouted, Fu Yao. There's people down here. I'm down here. After HuaLian shouted, he also waved, and Fu Yao shouted back from above, you're actually down there. What's at the bottom besides you? A lot of things. Why don't you come down and see for yourself? HuaLian said. Fu Yao probably thought the same, and blew a large ball of fire into the pit. In an instant, the entire Sinner's pit was lit up bright like day, and HuaLian finally saw clearly the kind of place he'd been standing in. All around him were mountains of bloody corpses piled high, innumerable bodies of Banyu soldiers, stacked on top of each other, faces and limbs blackened, dark blood smearing the bright armors. The corner HuaLian was standing was the only spot in the entire Sinner's pit that did not have a dead body. This was all done in a flash, in the dark, by San Lang after he jumped in. HuaLian turned to look at the boy next to him again. Before, in the dark, he thought San Lang looked taller and was distinctly different in certain features. But now, under the bright firelight, the one standing next to him was the same handsome youth he'd known. When he saw HuaLian looked over, he grinned. HuaLian looked down to check his wrists and boots, and both were also the same as before, having nothing that would cause any jingling sound. Just then, HuaLian heard a muffled noise. It was the sound of Fu Yao jumping down. Weren't you looking after the merchants? HuaLian asked. Having just entered the pit, Fu Yao wasn't yet used to the stench of blood, and fanned his hand to make the air flow. He replied indifferently, we waited for over 6 hours and there was still no sign of you, so we figured something had happened. I drew a circle for them to wait in, and came to check things out myself. HuaLian frowned. The circle won't last long. With you gone, what if they leave the circle thinking you'd left them behind? Fu Yao shrugged. 8 horses can't stop a man who really wants to seek death. I can't stop stubborn people, so nothing. What's with those two over there? Who's who? Fu Yao was tense, ready to defend against the two unknowns, but soon discovered astonishingly that Ki Mo was already heavily wounded on the ground, barely able to stand, and the Guoxi of Banyu had her head lowered and was silent. That one is the general of Banyu, and the other one is the Guoxi of Banyu. Right now there. Ki Mo suddenly leapt up before HuaLian could finish. He had been lying on the ground gathering his strength, and was finally able to jump up with a shout, aiming his fists at the Guoxi of Banyu. A large beefy warrior attacking a little girl. In the past, HuaLian would have never allowed this sort of thing to happen before him. But Ki Mo had every reason to hate the Guoxi, and she could very well defend herself, yet she didn't, letting herself be thrown around like a broken ragdoll. Ki Mo shouted at the Guoxi, "Where are your scorpion snakes? Come on. Let them bite me to death too. Give me that release." The Guoxi gloomily replied, "Ki Mo, my snakes don't listen to me anymore." "Then why don't they kill you?" He scoffed. "I'm sorry, Ki Mo," the Guoxi apologized softly. "Do you really hate us that much?" The Guoxi shook her head and Ki Mo became angrier. "You're going to be the death of me. If you don't hate us, why did you betray us? You shameless spy, disgusting mole, traitor!" Exclamation mark. Fu Yao watched him strike harder and harder. The blows were all single-sided, and he couldn't help but frown. What are they saying? Shouldn't we go stop them? HuaLian couldn't watch any more either, and rushed forward to stop Ki Mo. General, why don't you tell us who that Yonggan thug really is? Wheel. Suddenly, the Guoxi grabbed his wrist. The grip was hard and came unexpectedly, and HuaLian's heart dropped, thinking she was going to ambush him, but when he looked back down at her, the Guoxi was on the ground, a small bruise at the corner of her mouth, her head raised, watching him intently. She didn't say a single word, but her dark eyes were intense with a flaming sense of life. This demeanor overlapped with an image from a far-gone memory. After a pause, HuaLian blurted, "It's you." The Guoxi's voice also trembled. General Hua. This back and forth stunned everyone in the pit. Fu Yao rushed forward, knocked Ki Mo out with a punch, and demanded, "You two know each other?" HuaLian didn't answer him. He knelt down, gripped the shoulders of the Guoxi, and examined her face. Earlier, they stood too far apart and he couldn't see clearly. Plus, it had been over 200 years, this girl had matured in that time, and for many various reasons, he didn't recognize her at first. But now that he looked again properly, it was the same face from his memories. HuaLian couldn't speak for the longest time, and it was a good moment before he sighed. "Banyu." The Guoxi quickly clutched at his sleeves, and the gloomy face suddenly came alive with excitement. "It's me. General Hua, do you still remember me?" "Of course I remember you." But HuaLian gazed at her for a moment and sighed. "But what have you done to yourself?" Hearing his words, her eyes suddenly filled with pain. "I'm sorry, Captain, I messed up," she muttered. In that exchange there was General this, Captain that, making it glaringly obvious to the bystanders. Fu Yao was in shock. "Captain. General. You. How did this happen?" "Then the tomb of the general is he pushed. My tomb, HuaLian replied. Didn't you say you only came to collect junk 200 years ago? Fu Yao questioned. This is a long story. That was originally the plan, HuaLian answered. Around 200 years ago, due to some such reasons, HuaLian couldn't muck around in the east anymore, and decided to stay out of sight for a while. He had planned to cross the King Ridge and head to the south to start a brand new life of scraps. Thus, he took up his compass and walked southward. But the more he walked, the more he thought woefully, how come the scenery was all wrong? There should have been an abundance of trees and greenery, cities and crowds, so how come his path was becoming more desolate? Suspicions aside, however, HuaLian stubbornly continued on. He walked and came upon the Gobi Desert. It took a gust of wind, blowing a fistful of sand into his face before HuaLian finally realized that his compass was broken. The direction it was guiding him this entire journey was wrong. Since there wasn't anything he could do about the whole thing, he might as well take this chance to visit the desert scenery and continued walking. Only, he changed course slightly and traveled northwestward, and finally arrived at the border where he settled nearby to the kingdom of Banyu. At first, I was just collecting junk around the area, HuaLian said. But the border was troubled, and with so many skirmishes, there were often runaway soldiers, so the army would draft anyone in to recruit to make up the numbers. So you were forced into the army? Stan Lang asked. Yeah, HuaLian replied. But doing anything at all was more or less the same, so it didn't matter to me. And then after chasing away some bandits a couple times, I somehow got promoted to captain. The people gave me face and would call me General too. Why did she call you General Hua? Fu Yao questioned. Your surname isn't Hua. HuaLian waved his hand and said dismissively, don't worry about it. I randomly made up a fake name at the time. I think it was Hua C. 30. Hearing the name, Stan Lang's expression changed slightly, his lips twitching. HuaLian didn't pay attention and continued. With a battle-torn border came many orphans. When I was free, I'd play with them sometimes. One of them was named Banyu. When there were bandits, HuaLian was surely the bravest soldier, and no one dared block his way, nor did anyone dare to even stand beside him. But when there weren't, it was as if anyone could order him around. One day he went and sat by a wall to start a campfire, using his own helmet to cook. As he cooked, the smell of it drifted out, and a few enraged soldiers came to kick over whatever it was he was cooking. HuaLian picked up his helmet with a broken heart, but when he looked back, he saw a small, disheveled, and grimy child crouched behind him, picking at the stuff knocked to the ground with her hands, without caring whether it was too hot, stuffing it into her mouth. He was shocked. Don't wait, little kid, you. As expected, that little kid scarfed down a few lumps of the stuff she had picked off the ground, then dry heaved heavily, crying loudly. HuaLian was so shaken that he picked her up upside down and ran laps until all the stuff she ate came back out. After that was done, he crouched down and wiped away a seat for them. Are you all right, little kid? I'm so sorry. But don't ever tell your parents about this, and next time, don't pick up any more random stuff off the ground to eat. Wait, what are you doing now? That child's face was covered in tears, but she still went to pick off the ground again, still wanting to eat. It was only after HuaLian grabbed her that he realized that the skin of this child's stomach was practically pressed to the back of her bones. When people starved to this point, anything could be eaten, even if it was disgusting to the point of tears. She would eat it. HuaLian had no choice, and went back to bring her the last of his rations. Then afterwards, he could often see this child stalking him in the shadows nearby. In his memories, the little girl Banyu was always gloomy, her body and face full of bruises, and when she looked at him, she would stare just so from below. Because she was singled out by the children of the Banyu kingdom. Other than HuaLian, there was only a Yongan boy living at the border who'd sometimes pay attention to her, so she'd spend her days tagging along behind the two of them. She rarely spoke, but she was fluent in the Han dialect, so HuaLian didn't know where she came from. But she was a random wandering child, so he randomly took her in. When he was free, sometimes he'd teach them songs, sometimes wrestle, sometimes show off his busker move, shattering boulders on one's chest or something, and they got along quite well. HuaLian shook his head. I had thought that Banyu in the Guoshi's title was the country. I didn't realize it was actually the name of the Guoshi. And then Fu Yao asked. And then, it's pretty much the same as what the memorial wrote, HuaLian said. After some silence, San Lang spoke up. The memorial said you died. On the subject of that memorial, HuaLian felt quite bummed out. Weren't memorials usually praised and exaggerated good deeds to glorify the deceased? All those mentions of the demotions aside, why did it have to so solemnly record the embarrassing way he died? While they were hiding away from the sandstorm and he read to this part, he could barely look at it straight on. If it wasn't for San Lang, who also understood Banyu script and was watching him, he was going to pretend that segment never existed. Having something like that written down, even he wanted to laugh at it, never mind other people. That he'd had the nerve to ask those seeking shelter in his memorial to not laugh as they commentated and laughed at his epitaph, it made him feel really bummed. HuaLian's forehead was becoming red from all the rubbing. Oh, that. Of course I didn't die. I faked it. Fu Yao had a face full of disbelief. HuaLian explained himself. I got trampled on too hard and couldn't get up, so there wasn't any other way besides faking my death. Anyway, truthfully, HuaLian couldn't quite remember exactly how he died, nor why that battle broke out in the first place, only that it was over something petty. He really didn't want to fight. Victory or defeat was meaningless. But by then his rank could go no lower, and no one would listen to him. In the midst of battle, everyone saw red, so when he rushed out, it was blades and swords coming at him from both sides, cutting him down. Fu Yao questioned, it must be because you're an eyesore standing in the middle that you raised the ire of both sides, right? Otherwise, why would people just cut you down when they see you? Besides, I'm sure you knew there were many who hated you, so why didn't you evade all those people? Why did you have to charge in? I'm sure you could have dodged if you wanted to. 29 Han was the dialect of Yongan. 30 The name Hua Si is meaningless in this particular context, but the character for Hua is the same as the one in Hua Cheng's name. Next chapter. Ch.28 Dallying HuaLian, Nightfall in Sinner's Pit 5. I really don't remember, all right. Lian said. Even if he couldn't die, he couldn't stand that kind of butchering. Thinking this couldn't go on. In his head, Lian resolutely dropped to the ground to fake his death, but even in death, he was trampled to the point of passing out. It was water choking him that woke him, because corpses were usually thrown into the rivers after battles. Lian went with the river flow, and floated back to the kingdom of Yongan like a heap of junk. Afterwards, he took several years to recover from his wounds, picked up an unbroken compass to start off anew, and finally made it to his original destination in the south, and stopped minding what went down in the kingdom of Banyu. I'm sorry, Banyu muttered again. Fu Yao furrowed his brow. Why does she keep apologizing to you? San Lang suddenly spoke up. Pimo said Guoxi of Banyu left for the Midlands after a clash between the two armies. Were you involved in that? With his reminder, and recalling what was written on the memorial, some things were coming back to see Lian, but only a small bit. Maybe. It was to save me, Banyu said. Everyone turned to look at her, and she mumbled, General Hua entered the fray to save me, and got flattened. Lian instantly remembered the agony of being trampled by thousands, and he hugged his arms in spite of himself, but when he saw two others watching him with unreadable expressions, he pulled himself back in a hurry and said, not flat. Not too flat. Fu Yao didn't look so smug anymore, and said awkwardly, well, aren't you a saint? Lian waved dismissively. Nothing of the sort. I think I was just going to pick the child up and run away immediately, but we didn't retreat fast enough and got caught between the two armies. If that's the case, Fu Yao said, how can you not remember something like that? Lian looked at him solemnly. Do you not know how many hundreds of years old I am? So much can happen in just a decade. There's no way to remember everything in detail. Besides, some things are best forgotten. Rather than remembering how I was butchered and trampled hundreds of years ago, I'd prefer to remember that I ate a delicious meat bun yesterday. No. I'm sorry, Banyu said. Lian sighed. My dear Banyu, saving you was my own choice. You're not at fault. If you're going to apologize, perhaps it should be to others. Banyu was taken aback, and hung her head in silence. But maybe it's because my impression of you was from 200 years ago, but I don't think you're the kind of child who sought revenge and betrayed others. Will you tell me what exactly happened? Why did you open the fortress gates? Banyu contemplated, shook her head, and continued to remain silent. Then, why did you let the snakes out to bite people? Lian asked. This time, Banyu answered, I didn't release the snakes. Lian was taken aback. What? I didn't release the snakes, Banyu said. They ran off on their own. I don't know why, but they don't listen to me anymore. Hearing this, Fu Yao grew impatient. Banyu pleaded, "General Hua, I'm not lying." Before HuaLian responded, Fu Yao cut in rudely. "Anyone would say that after being captured. Even if you say it wasn't intentional, I've heard all that before. All those people crossing the pass were certainly all injured by your snakes. Show me your hands, you're under arrest." Banyu shut up and extended both arms. Fu Yao immediately took out a god-binding rope and apprehended both Banyu and Kimo, then said, "All right. We've accomplished our goal for this trip. It's all over now." Just then, San Lang spoke up. She had no reason to lie. HuaLian also felt there was a need for further interrogation. He turned to Banyu. "Can you not control any of your snakes?" Banyu answered, "I can control them, and they'll obey most of the time. But there are times when they won't. I don't know why." After some thought, HuaLian said, "Why don't you call them out and show us?" Banyu had knelt down before him earlier. Now, she finally rose to her feet and nodded. Soon, a wine-red scorpion snake slithered out from underneath a corpse, raised its head, and curled itself above a pile of dead bodies. It soundlessly flicked its tongue to the group. HuaLian was about to take a closer look at the snake, but saw Banyu widen her eyes, face strange. Lian's heart dropped and he thought, "Oh no." As he thought, after flicking its tongue, the snake opened its mouth and pounced towards him in attack. It was a sudden lunge, but HuaLian was ready, and was about to grab for it when boom! Something exploded. When he opened his eyes again to see, the snake was already a splatter of guts on the ground, having been thoroughly blown apart. It was a calculated blast, too, none of the venom spilled. HuaLian immediately remembered another instance where a snake died like this before they entered the Banyu ruins, but there was no need to say who did it at this point. He hadn't even had the chance to look at San Lang before a red sleeve flashed before him, barring and separating him from Banyu. On the other side, Fu Yao also said coolly, "I knew she lied. Did you think this snake can manage to bite him under these circumstances? Foolish." Banyu's face was already pale when she saw that snake, and when she heard him, her head shot up. "I didn't do it. I said there are some snakes that don't obey, and that one was one of them just now." Fu Yao didn't believe a single word. "Who knows if it was actually disobeying or obeying you? That one wasn't even called forth by me," Banyu said. HuaLian was about to speak when another two wine-red scorpion snakes peeked out from under a different corpse, flicking their tongues and watching him intently. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth, from the mountains of dead bodies, and from all around every corner of the pit, came innumerable scorpion snakes. Everyone stared at Banyu, who was kneeling on top of a pile of corpses, and Fu Yao started spinning a ball of spiritual energy in his palm, shouting towards her, "Make them go away. They can't all disobey." Banyu scrunched up her brows, looking as if she was trying to drive them out. Yet more and more scorpion snakes appeared, curling and crawling, slithering ever closer. Bites from one or two snakes might not kill him, but hundreds and thousands was harder to say. Even if they didn't die, it wouldn't be pretty. HuaLian raised his wrist, about to call forth Ruoye, but saw that when the snakes slithered to a certain distance, they would stop and hesitate, forming a weird circle around him and San Lang. It dawned on HuaLian, and he glanced at the boy next to him. He was watching the snakes condescendingly with immense contempt. The scorpion snakes seemed to be able to read his eyes and didn't dare approach. They backed off bit by bit, lowering their savage heads as they did so, and pressed against the ground submissively like servants. But there seemed to be another power controlling them, making them unable to abandon attacks and leave completely. Thus, many of the snakes turned around and slithered towards Fu Yao. Fu Yao swung his hand, and a blast of flames burst from his sleeve, killing a circle of snakes. That wouldn't last long, however, and HuaLian said, "Let's go up and get out of here first." Whoosh! Ruoye shot out from HuaLian's arm and flew upwards. But soon, another whoosh, and it was back on HuaLian's arm. HuaLian was taken aback and raised his wrist, admonishing the silk band. "What are you doing back here?" The array was released. "Hurry and go." But Ruoye remained wrapped on his arm, trembling, as if he bumped into something terrifying at the top. HuaLian was still chiding it when suddenly, a long rope of something fell. Plop! It dropped on Fu Yao's shoulder. Fu Yao went to grab for it, and his face changed the moment he brought it before his eyes. It was another scorpion snake that fell from the sky. This took Fu Yao off guard, and after getting bitten, he hurled the snake towards Banyu. Even with her hands tied, she still unconsciously tried to catch the snake, and having caught it, the dark red snake curled itself up around her arm and did not attack. Just then, another plop, and a second scorpion snake landed on the ground. HuaLian could guess why Ruoye refused to go up now. Borrowing the faint light of the moon, HuaLian raised his head and only just barely saw this sight. Hundreds of little wine-red dots were falling rapidly into the sinner's pit. A snake deluge. The red dots were coming closer, and HuaLian yelled, "Fu Yao! Fire! Shoot a stream of fire upwards and get rid of them halfway." Fu Yao bit his palm to break skin, swung his hand, and a series of blood drops shot out, transforming into a curtain of fire, jetting up the pit. Those sweeping flames rose to over tens of feet and hung midair, disintegrating all scorpion snakes that had touched it, burning them to ashes, dissolving the snake deluge. Temporarily safe, HuaLian let out a breath of relief. "That was good, Fu Yao. Thank goodness for you." Yet that spell consumed immense powers, and after one round, Fu Yao's face was pale. He turned around and ignited a ring of fire, dispelling the snakes on the ground, and shouted at Banyu, "And you say those snakes don't obey you? If it weren't you controlling them, why wouldn't they attack you?" San Lang laughed. "Maybe it's because of your bad luck. They didn't attack us either." Fu Yao turned to look at him, his eyes sharp and narrowed. HuaLian could sense trouble with the ample hints he'd gotten that he hadn't had time to digest in his head. He didn't want to see the two start fighting. He said, "Let's figure out what's going on with those snakes first. Let's charge out." Fu Yao sneered. "What's going on?" Either the Guoxi of Banyu is lying, or the one next to you is causing trouble. HuaLian looked at Banyu, then looked at San Lang, and said, I don't think it's either of them. His tone was gentle but firm. It was the conclusion he had come to after much thought. However, Fu Yao must have thought he was shielding him intentionally. The face illuminated by the flames was unkind. Lian couldn't tell if he was angry or laughing. Your Royal Highness, Fu Yao said. Don't play pretend when you know the truth. Do you still know your place? I'm sure you're already very aware of what exactly the thing is next to you. I won't believe you hadn't realized it at all.